Morning, everyone. I hope you are well. Hi, Susanna. It's good to see you again.
Morning, Izzy.
Morning. Morning, everyone else. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all surviving in the heat. I know it is extremely hot in the UK at the moment. Well, extremely hot for us, which is, there are levels to it. But I hope you're all doing well. If you can pop your cameras on, it does make a big difference if we can see you. But I know that they might be on and off today, just as we all battle the humidity and the heat and everything. Perfect. I think I'm pretty much getting everybody in. Fab. I will kick things off. So, welcome from HPMA. My name's Izzy, and as usual, I'll be here throughout the session to support with any technical needs or questions. So, if you need anything from me, just drop me a note in the chat box, or you can email me. I know some of you prefer to do that, so that's also fine. As you can see, the session is being recorded today, and you will be on mute when you enter the room. That's just to keep the audio clear, but feel free to come off mute, share your thoughts and ideas. These are interactive sessions. We want to hear from you, and you have set the time aside today for your learning. So do make sure you're in a position where you're able to be present and really make the most of it. So that does involve, coming off mute and sharing things with colleagues, but then also having that camera on where you can, so that you can actually see people in the room and you can really get involved. I'm pretty sure that is everything from me. Nicole, I'll keep letting people in the background, but I'm happy for you to get going.
Great, thanks, Izzy. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you, and I recognize some names of people that I've worked with. And it is quite a warm day, so Izzy and I were talking, we'll try and bring in some regular breaks. But if you do need some water, feel free to grab some as we go along. Um, but a little bit more about my background. I was just thinking about it the other day. I've been mediating since 2004. And I'm from Australia, which is quite funny because I'm really struggling in the heat. But I don't think I'm built for the sun. But my start in conflict resolution was really around training as a community mediator. I was a restorative justice practitioner. I worked with the Met Police. I trained police officers in street restorative justice. So how do we de-escalate conflicts that would start on the street? And then I moved into family mediation, divorce, but that wasn't something I really took to. And then since 2008, I've been working only in organizational context as an individual mediator, but also working with teams and team conflict, but also part of what I do as a mediator, people will come into the room, whether it's two people or a team, and they will perhaps not talk to each other. The positions are very polarized. Sometimes they don't even look at each other. But by the end of the process, there's a transition, there's a movement, and that people often ask the same thing. Well, why didn't we have a conversation earlier? Why did we have to go through a grievance? Why didn't we address this? And I think it's a really interesting question. And not everybody knows the answer to it because we're all human beings. But from my experience, it's a very layered approach. It's not just down to the individuals, because when we're in conflict, the last thing we want to do is often sit down and talk to the person, particularly if we're angry or upset. So we need managers and leaders to be able to spot those early warning signs and be able to support people to have those kind of conversations. So one of the things that I really like to do is bring all of that learning from mediation back into the organization. So I do a lot of training with managers and leaders. I set up internal mediation schemes, whether that's something NHS Trust or other organizations are doing for the first time, or refreshing teams because people come and go and they leave. But having that resource internally isn't going to solve all of the problems. Sometimes we need some external support, but it's a good way in nipping those conflicts in the bud and really giving people that voice and that platform to be able to have some of those challenging conversations. And even though mediation or any form of informal conflict resolution does get it resolved, it does come with a sense of relief, but also a sense of shame as well. How do we get here as beliefs start to change? I find that there's there's a holding of two conflicting emotions there. So we're focusing on how to manage team conflict. And some of what I want to bring you to this session is first understanding a little bit about how conflict escalates, because that's part of it as a manager and leader. So we all probably know by the time somebody gets to that place and wants to contact HR, whether it's raising a grievance or just raising a concern, that there's a threshold, there's a limit that's perhaps been triggered, and sometimes the goodwill isn't there to resolve things informally. So how do we recognize those early warning signs of conflict in teams? And then what can we do as managers and leaders before it escalates? And sometimes we do need to ask for help, whether it's from OD or HR. But what I want to give you today is some key tools that we use as conflict resolution practitioners, but you guys can use as managers and leaders as well. Or if you're in a HR role, supporting managers and leaders, you can provide them with some of these skills as well. So Izzy will send you a copy of the slides, and also there is the video recording as well as we go through. And we'll try and keep it quite interactive and a little bit of practice around some of the skills and tools as well. But I think it's worthwhile just touching on where we are in current times. And there's a lot going on politically. There's a lot going on in organizations, particularly in the NHS. Many of my NHS clients are going through restructures at the moment, whether there's mergers, sometimes people's jobs are at risk. And that alone is going to trigger a sense of conflict, sometimes competition. Maybe there's sickness, maybe there's people leaving roles, but actually it's not that easy to move into different roles or transition to another organization. So people are staying in roles where there's a lot of unhappiness and tension, and that's going to have an impact on team. And whether you're clinical or non-clinical, a lot of us are working sometimes online. There's online meetings, and I find that since the pandemic, conflict hasn't gone away. It just shows up differently. So we don't have the corridor conversations like we used to have, or we don't sometimes have to have that awkwardness in a meeting. We're online, we can switch our cameras off. And so conflict hasn't gone away, but it then becomes a little bit more hidden, particularly in a team environment. But what we're also seeing is more burnout, more mental health, and that's not necessarily conflict related, but mental health can be an impact of unresolved conflict, particularly in a team. So I just wanted to make a note of that some of the mediation cases I'm getting, whether it's two-party or team, there's lots of different layers to what's going on, particularly around shame as well. And I'm getting a lot more conflict coming through where neurodiversity might be part of that situation or that conflict as well. So I want to get us into our first breakout session. And Izzy will get people into groups of 4 or 5, depending on how their numbers work. And just having a think about, well, what do we mean by team? And what is a good team? What feels like an unhealthy team? Um, uh, and thinking about what's the worst team that you've ever been in? What were some of the behaviors? What were some of the characteristics? What was the manager doing, or how was conflict addressed? And so we all come into a team having a sense of what a healthy team should look like, but just thinking about, well, what was a time where you experienced the worst team culture or the worst team dynamic? What were some of the things that made it that? What was the impact, positive or negative, on the team? So, Izzy, when you're ready, if you could get people into their groups.
Yep, I will open the rooms up now.
Yeah, I can't see it, but that's okay. Welcome back, everybody. So it'd be great to hear from some of the groups. What came up for you? How do we define an unhealthy team or a team that isn't working well? What were some of the things that you came up with? Oh, just make sure you're off mute.
Shall we?
Chris?
Hiya. We talked about lack of confidence to speak up is a
Mm,
really good indicator.
yeah, yeah. And the lack of confidence, is that often about fear of how it be perceived?
Yeah.
That people are going to be judged? Yeah. So that sense of safety. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chris. What about from some others? What were some of the things that Kathy? Kathy
Unit.
McDonald?
Yes, in our group, we talked about someone who had started a new role and it kind of set objectives for their line manager, but then they turned out not to be what was meant to be happening. And put that person in a really difficult position because that's what they have been working towards and mixed messages kind of thing. We talked about there was a really positive one about someone in our group in South Africa worked for an organisation who really invested in them, really invested in their professional development, and they progressed up through. So that was like a good team. I was talking about the experience I had with a local authority where it felt really toxic. And trying to discover what that was, it seemed to come right from the very top down. And that was very challenging because it kind of permeated the whole organisation. And people were really very happy there. And it's also, that's a tough nut to crack when you're in the middle and you can't really control what's going on.
Yeah, and as individuals, we can't always control what's going on with other people, but we can control our own reaction and response to things. Dorothy, I can see your hands up there.
We touched on resentment, sort of interpersonal resentment. One of the participants shared an example where sort of you moved into a role where you were younger than the people that you were managing and the sort of resentment that comes with that. And obviously there's other facets such as gender or ethnicity or age, sex, etc. Sorry, said that twice. But also shared how mediation works, that they hadn't had a personal experience of it, but had witnessed how it actually did seem to mend relationships.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we can talk more about mediation as we go along, but I think what people value about that process is being able to have a voice in a structured and safe process, where they feel heard and where the issues that people are bringing to the surface, there's an acknowledgement and an agreement on how things are moving forward. And so a mediation process can really support that kind of communication. What I see a lot of, actually, and we'll talk more about this as we go along, is people see conflict in a team, or a team not getting along, and then they do team building. Or let's just go to the pub, or let's have a day away. And actually, it doesn't resolve conflict. To resolve conflict, we need to deal with the elephants in the room and actually name what's going on and create safety around that. It won't resolve through let's all just try and get along, or let's have a bit of fun, or let's get out of the office. So that's something that I always like to pass on, because I get asked to do a lot of team away days, or sometimes a lot of team mediation as well. And I'm very I do a lot of mapping around that and what's actually going on, what's at the heart of it, because if it's conflict, then team building isn't the right approach, or a team away day. Thank you, Dorothy. Anyone else want to comment or share what's come up in your group? Hilary?
Yeah, we had a contrast really. The good manager example was somebody that was very open, very supportive, very flexible, and very solution focused. So no blame. You know, finding kind of looking for solutions to challenges rather than that judgment. And then the poor experience was the complete converse of that, really. A complete bullying approach in a line manager, somebody that rubbished the team. People felt psychologically unsafe. This was my example. Actually, I used to work in a psychological therapist team, and this was a counselling psychologist, but her approach to managing staff was appalling. Yeah, and people were silent in meetings. I think somebody said about not speaking up.
Yeah.
And, you know, it affected retention, sickness, absence, stress levels. It was not a healthy environment. So,
yeah, and all of those things sound familiar of what comes through my doors as well. And, you know, when we think about harmony in the mediation world, we have a label of something called fake harmony, actually, because when people aren't speaking up, or if you ask, oh, how's everyone getting on? They say fine. Any issues? No. That could be okay, but you can feel it. You can cut the tension with a knife sometimes. And that's often a sign that people aren't feeling very safe to be open and honest. Or sometimes they've tried to be open and honest before, it's not met with support or understanding. It's perhaps met with judgment, or perhaps nothing changes. So all of the things that you guys have mentioned are things I've heard before, and these are common things that, oops, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Where's my slides? Haven't been on Zoom for a while. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, so something that you've all mentioned in different ways is an element of psychological safety. And I don't know if you've come across Patrick Leone's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And when we are trying to get results or accountability, or we're getting people to commit, those things can't happen unless there's a sense of trust. And what underpins trust is psychological safety. And that psychological safety could take different shapes, whether it's, do I feel safe to be open without judgment? Do I feel safe to be vulnerable without there being consequences later on? Am I okay to ask a question without it being shot down and being made to feel silly? Do I feel safe to be able to raise concerns if I'm the only one doing it? And so when we think about psychological safety, it's not just about, well, can I be open? Can I ask? Can I challenge? Because if there's too much challenge, then we're higher in anxiety. But if there is no challenge, then people don't feel safe either. And I've certainly seen that in a team where people won't be open and honest because they see their manager and leader not really making decisions, not taking direction. So people want their leaders to be compassionate, to be supportive, but also to be decisive, to be transparent, to be able to take action. And what people really define as what's important to them is being able to have a voice, for them to be heard, for them to be seen, to be visible, and for there to be transparency. And what do we mean by transparency? Sometimes things have to be confidential, but even if we don't know information, it's about acknowledging that actually I don't know what's going on at the moment, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know. Because if we don't have certainty, we tend to make up the gaps. And so we can't deal with conflict. So conflict could be in a team. Often it's stemming from I haven't felt heard, or there's a lack of communication, there's a lack of change. But we can't deal with conflict unless there's trust, and we can't trust unless there's psychological safety. So without those key things, then we have a dysfunctional team. And when I'm working in a team context, whether it's clinical staff or non-clinical staff, the thing that we work with first is establishing psychological safety. Because if that isn't there, or we don't have boundaries around that, then people won't be honest and people won't be open. And we can't mediate, we can't resolve interpersonal conflict if people aren't willing to be open about that. So that's one of the first things that we have to establish. And it may not be there, but if we have a shared agreement about what is psychological safety and what it means in this process or in this team, then we can all work to that definition and that agreement. So psychological safety won't exist unless there's a shared agreement or shared understanding around that. And something that you may have come across before is the psychological contract. And one of the things why I'm bringing this in, because at the end of a team conflict, or when I'm asked to mediate, or even in two-party mediation, essentially what we're building is a psychological contract. So we can have tangible outcomes. So we agree to have one-to-ones, or we agree to have regular team meetings. And in those team meetings, these are going to be the structures. And that's a transactional outcome, but it's not a psychological outcome. And to have a full resolution, we often need both. And so the psychological contract is about who does what, when, and how, but also what are our values? What are our team values? How do we want to be as a team? What do we agree to do and not do? And in a team mediation, what ends up is a team agreement on, well, how do we raise issues if they're there? What if we get into conflict again? How do we want to work together? What does that look like? And so it's there, something that everybody signed up to, and it's a team contract or a mediation agreement between two people. And that is something that managers and leaders can do from the outset with their teams before things escalate. So rather than being reactive, okay, we've got conflict, how do we solve it? Starting from a place of what culture do we want to have in our team? How do we want to treat each other? How do we want to raise issues? And that's something you can revisit, because the employment contract is, well, we agree to come to work and we agree to do these things, but the psychological is almost assumed. But when that's broken, it's hard to rebuild. So starting from scratch, or starting from the beginning with a team, helps prevent conflict from escalating. So what is conflict? And, when I'm working with different people, when I'm delivering training, often people will talk about conflict from a negative perspective because that's their experience. But essentially, conflict is where my own perception of my own needs and goals I perceive to be incompatible with someone else's. So at the heart of conflict is an unmet need. And our perception is our truth because it's our experience, but we might all have different experiences. So when I work with people in conflict, they all come to the mediation with different stories, different experiences of the same event. And it's how do we work through that narrative that gets them to a place where they can resolve it. But conflict is disagreement, it's misunderstanding, but it's also an opportunity. It's also about being creative. And I said earlier that that what we want to avoid is that fake harmony in a team where people aren't engaged, they're not speaking up, because actually that's a sign of a lack of psychological safety. We want people to have a debate, and we can't prevent conflict. And I think some of us think, well, we need to prevent it, but actually sometimes we need to have the disagreement in order to grow. And it's how we do that. How do we have those conversations? Because conflict will always be there. I get into conflict, you'll get into conflict. All teams have conflict, but how do we do it in a way that is constructive and not destructive where it's causing harm? So what we tend to want to look out for is micro behaviors, right? So it might be the little signs that something's not quite right. So you might have a team or two people. Normally they get along, they say good morning, everything's okay, but then one day they come to work and they're not engaging, they're not talking to each other. Or someone in a team meeting, they would normally have their camera on and be quite chatty, but suddenly their camera's off. But not just once, over a period of time. So what are the early warning signs? What are the little micro behaviors that we often see, the eye rolling, people say not saying good morning? And these are the things we want to be mindful of, because micro behaviors turn into micro conflicts. And they turn into micro conflicts when the trust is gone, when we start to be not feeling a sense of safety, where resentment comes up, where anger comes up. And so some of the micro behaviors that I often hear about, it might be being CC'd in emails. It might be sudden silence over messages. It could be tension, eye rolling, staying quiet. I think the first thing that often happens is people stop saying good morning to each other or hello. There's that disengagement. And conflict doesn't happen without our participation. So even if we think we're stepping back and we're avoiding conflict, it sits with us. It's on our minds. We're thinking about it. We're taking it home to our families. We're losing sleep over it. It's with us. We might not be actively or visibly engaging in it, but we're engaging in it by avoiding it. But what we're avoiding is the uncomfortable feeling. We're avoiding the awkwardness. We're avoiding the worry of, if I have the conversation, what will happen? And it's a form of protection. Sometimes it's a form of, well, there's a lot of shame there around this, and I don't want to be accountable. But as a manager, and there's a lot of pressure on managers, but managers are there in the team, they're in the thick of it, where HR might not be. But by the time HR get sight of maybe there's an issue or there's a conflict, this has usually been going on for quite a while. And so we want managers and leaders to be noticing some of these elements and gently picking up on them. Maybe not in front of everybody, because we don't want to call people out or trigger shame, but noticing and checking in a light way. I noticed that you've had your camera off over the last few meetings. Is everything okay? Or I noticed that there's a bit of tension in team meetings between you and Jane. I just wanted to check in. Because when we're in conflict, we're not, at the early stages, we're not thinking about raising or complaining about it. We're often in a place of avoidance and seeing what happens, but it starts to erode. So micro behaviors will turn into micro conflicts, whether that's sickness, absence, people start to take sides, we start to talk to our colleagues, maybe there's gossip that starts to happen, people feel excluded, and maybe there is an escalation to raising a concern or a grievance, or sometimes people just leave, they just move on, usually because there's they've tried to raise it before and there's been no engagement around that. But by the time people get to a place where they raise it as a grievance, they've reached a certain threshold. Maybe they've got to a place of, well, I need to protect myself here. Or maybe they've got to a place of, well, if I don't raise it, then nothing will change. But all formal processes have their place. But in my experience of being called at the end to pick up the pieces at late stage conflict, usually after an investigation, people are angry. They're feeling a sense of shame. Maybe they've been in an investigation for 10 months. They really don't want to speak to the other person. They're worried about their reputation. They're worried about going back into the team. They feel angry at the organization. So there's a lot going on. So we want to emphasize early resolution where managers and leaders can spot those early warning signs right there at the pre-conflict, early conflict stage, where you start to notice that behavior. And often, I don't know if this is something that people in the room experience, but it's something that I've heard quite a lot of, is people will come and speak to you as a manager and they will offload and they'll tell you about the situation and they'll say, but I don't want you to do anything. I want you to keep it confidential. And actually we want to respect that, but also we need to be proactive as a manager. And is that having an impact on the team? Is that impacting potentially patient safety if there's working clinically? But having a conversation around, okay, you've shared this with me. What makes you not want to address it? And working with perhaps the fear and, well, what if we don't do anything? Or maybe can we think through potentially some of the options? And so there's a need for them to tell you about it and for you to know about it, but then you're with this responsibility that you've agreed to keep confidential. And we want to be proactive because we can't avoid conflict, but we can avoid it from escalating. And at the other end, like I said in my introduction, people always say, why didn't we have the conversation earlier? Why did you raise a grievance? Why didn't we deal with this? And I was just mediating between 3 senior leaders who were part of the same team and 1 clinician. And the whole mediation was about this. We were having informal conversations. Why did you raise a grievance? That impacted my reputation. I felt really hurt when you did that. And trying to work through that narrative and also the other issues, people end up feeling very hurt and aggrieved by that. So how do you deal with things after a formal process or even after mediation? So mediation is a 1-day process and it really does work. It has a really high rate of success. But it's confidential and often it's between 2 people. If it's between a team, then everybody's aware of it. You're all involved. But if it's 2 people and they're coming back into a team after not talking to each other for quite some time and the team are used to them being in conflict, sometimes there's a fear of, well, what's going to happen and how do I reintegrate back into the team? What do I say now that I have a different reality and a different experience? Or even coming off of a formal process, a grievance doesn't resolve relationships. It addresses the facts only. And so people's perceptions may not change. And so one of the things that we can do as managers is to avoid team conflict is thinking about how do we bring people back into the team following a formal process or even a mediation. And it's difficult because it's shrouded in confidentiality. We can't be open about certain things, but we don't need to be open about what was discussed in order for us to be able to name how people are feeling. And I remember one mediation I was asked to support a couple of years back where it was with a clinical team and one individual was just coming off of a disciplinary and the rest of the team didn't know about that and felt that there was no accountability. They were able to get away with certain behavior. And actually, some people in the team didn't want to work with this individual. And for 2.5 years, this team were really, really struggling until I was called in to be able to support them. But in the mediation, the individual said, well, I went through a disciplinary and this is what happened. And I had training and this was on my record. And then the whole team looked to the manager. But it's not always the manager's fault because there is confidentiality. But how do we integrate people? Because often, what's expected is that, I'll come back to that, is that, well, the process is done, mediation's done, off you go, get on with it. But people don't always know how to get on with it, particularly when it involves a team. So we can fix certain things, but how do we restore that? How do we restore team functioning, which I think is important. So I'll start to explore some skills and concepts, but just to embed us into thinking about some of those things, I'll get us looking at a particular case. But before I do that, does anybody have any comments or questions around what I've covered so far? Okay, and feel free if anyone has some comments or questions just to pop those in the chat or pop your hand up. So Izzy, could we get people into groups of 3 or groups of 4? And just while Izzy's setting that up, here's a particular case that I was working on a few years back that I've anonymized and changed a little bit. In your groups, I want you to think through this particular situation. What's standing out for you? What might be some of the causes of conflict there? What might be some of the things that you might want to consider if you were a manager trying to address this situation in your team? And this will help be a base as we go through some of the other elements this morning before we start to look at some tools and techniques. So Izzy, whenever you're ready, we can pop people into groups of 3 or 4. And I think we'll have about 8 minutes to talk through this. And then we'll come back and we'll feedback and then we'll take a little refreshment break so people can grab some water and stretch your legs. Okay.
Can I just give people just a second? Can you make sure you just take a photo of this for me, just so that you've got it to work within the breakout room? That would be fab. Thank you. Okay, perfect. I will open the rooms up now. Back with us. Welcome if you're just rejoining us. We're just waiting on everybody else. They just have 10 seconds.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, I'm late joining. Just had problems getting access. So I don't know if it's still worth me carrying on with the meeting.
I'll just drop you a note in the chat box, Freddie. Just give me 1 sec.
Lovely, thank you.
Perfect, Nicole. That's everybody back in the main room.
Okay, great. Thanks, Izzy. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, what were some of the things that you thought about looking at that example? What were some of the considerations if you were to try and address that as a manager? Gillian?
We said we'd start with the doctor to understand what the underlying issues were to kind of help us navigate which path we would go down with mediation between then him and the nurse, conversation with the wider team
Yeah.
to understand if there's anything he would be happy to share with the team so they've got more understanding and empathy.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, that would make the situation a little bit more tricky for other people to understand and any assumptions that were going on in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what might be going on a deeper level there, and perhaps separating out the issues. What is going on for the doctor that might need some well-being support or potentially occupational health or management support, and what's happening in the team dynamic, that can be addressed. Yeah. Anyone else? Groups? Would this be a case for bringing the whole team together, or would you deal with it in a different way?
I'll put my hand up there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Okay.
That's all right. So we talked about how we probably want to try and address it informally first. So we'd want to speak to both of them to have an understanding individually of their particular perspectives, that informal check-in that you spoke about, but an opportunity to allow each person to be really heard and seen as part of that, which might help not escalate it further. So it's almost like an informal conversation to see if we could try and address it and try and bring them together to have a conversation once we've got an understanding of where it's perspective.
Right.
But we also kind of talked about the fact that we could kind of informally use one of the models that you do use in mediation, which is the SING model. So not necessarily use it in terms of the mediation bit, but use it as a way in to have the conversation.
Lovely. Yeah.
So you've got an understanding of what their story is, what the impact has been from their perspective, but also what their needs are, because their needs are very different from their wants and what they want to get out of whatever this thing is. Before we went down a formal mediation route, we never quite got to the point of talking about what do we then do, because we've then discovered Camp A and Camp B. So we didn't quite get to that. We're hoping that our informal conversation might escalate it. But we also picked up the fact that something obviously needs to be done because of the complaint from the patient.
Yeah.
So
there's lots of different levels there, isn't there? There's a patient complaint. There's Camp A, Camp B. There's the team that feels like it's not in the best place. And when we're looking at any kind of team dynamic, is it all against one? Is it a mixed? Are there multiple issues? Because right now we've just got two individuals. There was an incident, but there's conversations, there's rumblings across the team as well. Did anyone discuss the us versus them, or Camp A, Camp B?
I don't think we really got to that bit. We were kind of, well, like, I suppose the closest we got to it, Nicole, was about the passive aggression that is happening if nobody is speaking to each other, and how that may make, because nothing's being said, but everybody feels it, right? So the impact on the team, but very much so the patient, the impact on the patient who is potentially feeling very vulnerable already, and then having to deal with the passive aggression of two people looking at. But we didn't quite get as far as
get to the Camp A, Camp B. Yeah, and so there's lots of different layers in there, and it can feel hard. Where do we even begin? But one of the key things is you don't want to throw everybody into a team session and say, okay, let's sort it out. Psychological safety is always the most important element there, and there's going to be management issues that aren't going to be able to be resolved in an informal setting, whether that's mediation or whether that's you have your OD come in and facilitate a session, or whether the manager tries to do that themselves. But I think, Kay, is one of the things you were highlighting as one of the tools that we use as mediators is the SING structure, that people can often approach a conflict through demands and outcomes and positions. Well, they should be sacked for what they did. So having that one-to-one to understand their experience diffuses a lot of that, hopefully a lot of that strong emotion, and helps, the way I like to describe it, is helps bring scaffolding to the conversation, helps bring structure. So what is the story? What are the events? What's happened? What meaning do we make of those events? And after the break, I'll show you some different tools. But where we often go wrong as managers, or not just managers, but anyway, anyone, wherever we go wrong and we're trying to deal with conflict, is we stay at that top level, the what happened, and we try and resolve it from that level with people's positions. But actually, what we do as mediators is we help people make meaning of those things, and then get people to a place of where they can really address what they're really needing in that moment. For the doctor, maybe it's around recognition and respect for their expertise. Maybe for the nurse, it's also similar things. Respect or autonomy, and actually patient safety might be a shared goal. But right now it's you did this and you did that, and we can't stay at that level to be able to resolve it. So we'll refer back to that example as we go through some of the tools and techniques. But because it's such a warm day, I thought we'll just take a couple of micro breaks. So we'll have a micro break now, 5 minutes, stretch your legs, grab a glass of water, and then we'll have another micro break in about 45, 50 minutes as well, just to keep the air flowing and not feeling so warm. So come back in 5 minutes time. You can stay long.
Great. If you're coming back, if you can pop your cameras back on or just let us know in the chat box, that would be great. Fab, thanks everyone.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. So we'll start to go through some tools and techniques that I think may be helpful in navigating conflict with individuals, but also with teams as well. So just to give you a bit of an overview of restorative processes, and we're at one end where there may be investigations or disciplinary or grievances. We know that they're formal, but something important to remember is that they're facts and outcome based. They don't address relationships. What does address relationships is more informal approaches. And it's not always mediation. Sometimes mediation isn't always appropriate. It is voluntary. Team mediation or team facilitation, probably less voluntary than two-party mediation, because we want to be able to address a team, but we don't want to force anybody into that process. It's important to engage. And then there's also your OD approaches and different learning. And I do find that where there's interpersonal conflict, there has to be that conversation with the other person, or moving towards that. We can't always know how to deal with conflict necessarily by going, or dealing with conflict we have with an individual or a team by going on a communications course, or we'll pick up skills, but we all have blind spots and there needs to be awareness. And so sometimes coaching can be really helpful, or a version of mediation, which is a facilitated conversation, usually done by a manager or sometimes HR, very much at the lower level, or even management, just having those restorative conversations. And there's something about how we have those conversations that are important. And I do find that sometimes managers, not all, can sometimes shy away from having some of those conversations out of very legitimate reasons. Well, I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to get it wrong. What if it doesn't have the outcome that we're looking for? And people can be resistant. They can be defensive. And usually at the heart of defensiveness is often a perceived feeling of being judged, or that they might be judged, or maybe it's a lack of accountability. Maybe it's shame that's driving that lack of accountability. And so it's not that simple. And in every mediation I've done, even though we get a great result, it's not an easy process at all. There's tears, there's walkouts, there's stopping and there's starting, whether that's team mediation as well. So when it's about humans, it's very difficult to we don't want to label it because we're interactive. We can all respond in different ways at different times, but we want to focus on informal approaches to really try and resolve those interpersonal relationships, particularly in a team. So some of the key principles that I always keep in my back pocket is that we always want to separate the person from the problem. And what does that mean? We tend to label people, you are a bully, you're difficult, or they're always like this, ignore them. So we label people, and by doing that, we're giving them a particular identity, and people will push back on that and react to that. Nobody wants to be labeled, whether that's you're undermining me, you're a bully, you're difficult, you're a problem. And it locks us in rather than opens us up. So whenever we're having a conversation around conflict, we want to separate the person from the behavior. So we're challenging the behavior, but we're compassionate to the person. When we feel seen and heard and have a voice, we move towards. When we feel judged and closed down, we stay away, we stay locked in. And we don't have to agree with what somebody's action is or behavior is in order to validate or be empathic. And we want to pick up on those micro behaviors, avoid the cycle action and reaction, get in there quickly. And sometimes we think, well, maybe they'll sort it out. Let's just wait and see if it gets worse. But actually nipping it in the bud quickly is the best thing to do. We've talked about psychological safety, and people won't address conflict if there isn't an element of psychological safety. People coming into the mediation room don't necessarily feel psychologically safe with the other person, but we set up the process so that the mediator is impartial, that we're balanced, everybody has a voice. And through that structure, safety starts to build. And we do that with team mediation as well. We want to move away from positions. For example, I want an apology in writing, or they should be sacked for what they did. And focusing on, well, what's driving that? What's the meaning of that solution for you? What would that mean for you? And being able to reframe. So they're micromanaging me, and moving that language into a place of being able to open up dialogue rather than shutting it down. So these are some of the key principles that I abide by. And also intention versus impact is something I hear a lot of. And actually both things are valid, and people tend to defend themselves from a place of intent. That wasn't my intention. And the other person defends from a place of, well, this was the impact on me. And both things can be equally true, and they don't cancel out each other. But what's underneath that is often people's sense of shame and embarrassment around what's happened. And so that brings me to another concept I like to use. I call it the conflict onion. And actually, when we cut an onion in half, we see these different layers. And often what we hear or what comes out is the what happened, the behavior. You did this, you're a bully, you're always ignoring me. Some of the things that people describe, the resentment. And often we stay at that level, actually, and we need to go deeper to help people get to a place where they can have the conversation. And we all have blind spots. And so by having a one-to-one with somebody, and like what Kay said, is, well, what happened? What is the story? Okay, how did that make you feel? So we're looking at the threat. What was the threat around that? Was that around status? Was that around autonomy? Was that around a sense of belonging? Was that around a lack of trust? What was threatened? What was the trigger there? because then that creates meaning. And we can't go from you did this to this is how we're going to resolve it. People need to go through those layers and we can help them through our questions. And what are the drivers? What are you needing? So what happened, the story, the impact, and the needs. What's driving this? Because at the heart of conflict is an unmet need, the need for survival, the need for autonomy, for support, understanding, to have a voice, to feel heard, recognition. Behind every conflict is something that somebody's needing. And we're not great at articulating our needs. We tend to articulate those in demands or positions. Well, I want an apology in writing. But if we were to unpack what is an apology, it's usually, I want an acknowledgement. I want them to understand how their behavior impacted me and how I felt. So if people can give an acknowledgement, would people accept that over an apology? So moving through positions. And all of this is linked to someone's self-worth. Who am I? How am I seen? What does this all mean to me and my identity? And so it's helpful to think about the layers of a conflict like an onion. And when we're mediating or when we're with conflict, we're looking at all of these different layers. If we just stay at the top layer, we might go back and forth around behavior. Well, you did this. No, I didn't. You undermined me. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. So that's not helpful. And we want to unpack that so we get to the authentic narrative. What's really at the heart of it? What's really going on for that individual? And so for the doctor in our scenario, it might be that that person hasn't felt a sense of belonging in the team. Maybe it's around recognition, and status isn't about hierarchy or power. It's about, am I valued? Am I recognized? Am I treated with respect? So there's always three conversations that are happening when I'm working with individuals, whether that's on a mediation level, team level, or with some of the other work that I do. And there's the outer, what happened, the feelings-based conversation, and then how does that all link with our identity? What does that mean? Because people make meaning around things. And the meaning of my communication is the response you'll get. So what is the tone of voice? What's the interpretation behind the words? And so all of these conversations are happening at once. And so we want to address all of those key things. So thinking about that frame, sing, story, impact, needs, and goals. So something that is quite helpful to think about. So we looked at the onion and what is the threat? And there's a model that I really like. It's mostly taught in the coaching space, but it's by David Rock, and it talks about our nervous system. So when we're in conflict, or even if we're on the receiving end of any incivility, our nervous systems get triggered. And we've all heard about fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And the SCARF model looks at when do we go towards something, when we've got dopamine, we've got those helpful neurotransmitters, and that we feel seen, we feel valued, we feel open. So in a mediation, when people start to hear each other and there's that empathy and understanding, people start to open up, and where they were very entrenched about an apology before, they're much more open. Well, I'm sorry too. And look, I didn't really mean to do that. And, you know, it makes me really sad about how you're feeling. So that starts to open up. But in order for two people to get to that place, they have to feel a sense of safety and also connection as well. So if we're on the opposite end and our nervous systems are being triggered in that fight, flight, freeze, then we've got the cortisol, we're moving away, we've got anxiety, our thinking part of the brain shuts down. And David Rock looked at, well, there's 5 main things that trigger this reward moving away from mechanism. And it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And when we think about threat, a lot of what people feel threatened by can fit into one or all of these things. And so I just want to go through some of them because it's just helpful to have there in our mind as something to sort of reach for in our toolbox when we're having conversations. What's the actual threat that might be going on? And status, like I said, isn't about hierarchy. It's about how am I seen in this group? Do I feel respected and valued? And that's what often happens when people are coming out of a formal process and going back into the team. What will people think of me? My reputation's ruined. And so there's a real sense of shame that can underpin that. So the threat can sometimes also be called out in public or challenged. Maybe it's about the tone of voice or the words that are being used, or where expertise isn't acknowledged. And this came out in a team mediation that I was doing last week, where one of the clinicians said, I've worked really hard for this department. I work overtime. I'm the only doctor in the department that teaches the staff and junior doctors. And then a couple of the other people in the group piped up and said, well, I've never not acknowledged your expertise or contribution. We work hard as well. And so that was really important to that person, and also came out again in the same mediation where they said, well, why didn't you ask me for my opinion before you recruited that person? It's in my area of expertise. So for that person, status, being recognized, being acknowledged for their expertise was really important. The other one is certainty. In an environment where there's lots of restructures at the moment, people are worried about their jobs, getting their positions. There's a lot going on, and we can't guarantee certainty. But what we can do is be transparent. Like I said earlier, transparent around different messages. And I think someone had shared in your feedback about what constitutes an unhealthy team is, when there's vague messages or mixed messages. And sometimes when we're giving vague messages, maybe there's a lack of accountability there, or maybe there's things that can't be disclosed, so you're trying to give messages. But it's much better to be as transparent as we can and say, I know it's difficult, there's a lot of unknowns here, this is what I can offer you. We'll keep conversations. I mean, because otherwise people do fill in the gaps. So where there's uncertainty, there's anxiety, there's rumors, there's gossip, there's resistance, there's panic. And so we want to be transparent where we can. Autonomy is always going to be a key element that people want to have a sense of control, because when we have control, we have safety. That can go overboard sometimes and not have the right effect, but it's about giving people choice and being in any kind of informal approach or mediation, whether it's team mediation. Hopefully everybody's there because they're willing to be there. It doesn't mean that they're happy to be there or they want to be there, but are they willing to be there? And it's not just about showing up and saying, yep, my manager or HR told me to mediate. It's, are you willing to give this a go? Are you willing to resolve it? Because just showing up isn't necessarily a sign of choice. But we want to give people autonomy, because then if we give people autonomy, particularly in the decision-making process where we can, then they're more likely to own outcomes. But where there isn't that autonomy, even in a mediation, there's a lot of resistance. So if people aren't fully on board with the process, then I know mediation's probably not going to be the most effective, and I tend to push back. So relatedness, connection, everybody wants a sense of belonging. And when people don't feel safe, we withdraw, we avoid, we disengage, we move away. And certainly, I see a lot of, out of a place of protection, maybe we separate people from their teams while a process is going on, but that does have a real big impact on relatedness and team belonging. It can be hard to bring people back together. But it's about how safe do I feel with you? How vulnerable can I be with you? And we really want to make sure that we're spotting those us versus them culture, picking up gossip if we see it happening in teams. If there's a lack of trust, really being able to tackle that as well, and be able to name that. The fake harmony in teams is more of a red flag than a positive thing. And even in a two-party mediation, if I hear one person or even both people agreeing too much, then that to me is a little bit of a red flag. Are they agreeing to get out of the room because they're not feeling safe, or are they really agreeing? And so that's something I always check in with. And the last one is around fairness. And it's not just about, it's not about equality. It's about, have we treated people equally well? Because we can't treat everybody the same. We all have different needs. And I see this come up a lot where people might need reasonable adjustments around neurodiversity and the team don't understand. And that can raise conflict as well, and flexible working and other elements. But we want to treat everybody equally well. And I did a piece of research around justice and fairness. And what came out of that is, how do people perceive fairness? It's not about equal treatment. I mean, it's not about equal outcomes. It's about equal treatment. So did I have a voice? Was that heard? And also, how was I treated in that interaction? And that's what matters most to people rather than the outcome. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about threat and people's threat systems, because it is part of that onion, and it's helpful to understand what the threat is. So if I can hear someone's sense of status come through, then my response may be to ask about their experience, or to validate their expertise, or to help people in the team talk about that. Maybe I come with a summary, or to name that. So it helps us respond to what might be going on, or what might be the threat there. And just to summarize, what you can do, and there's lots of different things that you can do there, but particularly where it's about a status and how I'm seen, not hierarchy, how I'm seen by others. Where do I rate myself, and where do others rate myself in a group? So acknowledge that experience. Recognize the value, certainty, talk about transparency, regular updates. So as a mediator, I'm always very transparent about what I'm doing when. Autonomy, offer choice where you can. And if there is no choice, be clear about why. Relatedness, stop the gossip, clear boundaries, address that with the whole team. If you hear that us versus them, jump on that as quickly as you can, being transparent around decisions as well. So one of the other useful tools, and we'll get into a little bit of group work in a moment as well, is reframing. And if some of you are trained as mediators, you may have come across this before. And it's something we do a lot of as mediators, because people will come into the space and they'll say they're a waste of space, or they're really difficult, or wait till you meet them, or they're a nightmare to work with, and real blaming language. Language that also keeps people locked in. They're never going to listen. This is never going to work. What's the point in doing this? And it's kind of the half glass empty, half glass full. But reframing retains the emotion, retains the meaning of what somebody's experiencing. But we change the language, we put a different frame on it. And an easy way to think about that is thinking about it from a positive opposite, a need perspective. So some examples here. So she micromanages me. What's the positive opposite of micromanaging? So micromanaging is where somebody's controlling us. Maybe they're overlooking everything that we do. We don't feel like we have autonomy. So the positive opposite of that might be trust. It could be respect. It could be autonomy. So what we're doing with our reframing is reflecting back the need that underpins that. So she's micromanaging me. So it sounds like you would like to have more trust or more respect or more autonomy. And they could correct us, but what it does is it shifts that mindset from negative locked in to moving it slightly forward. Doesn't solve the situation, but then we can say, if they say, yes, I do want to feel trusted. Okay, so what does that trust look like? So we're taking people out of that conflict zone into a place of opportunity by reframing. If someone says, oh, this mediation will never work, it may not work. But what I'm hearing in that, so my reframe might be, so in order for this to work today, you need there to be change. What change would help you move forward? So I'm reframing it so I can take them into a more positive mindset to be able to work on what they're needing. Another example, they refuse to engage. So, you know, maybe we're naming that you're experiencing some resistance and you'd like to be open to, would you like to be open to meeting together? Or maybe it's about contribution. This team is toxic. It sounds like some people in the team are struggling to raise concerns directly. What concerns do you have that would help move the team forward? So we're taking it away from that negative into a place of opportunity. So we can take the negative word or phrase and see if we can flip it around into a positive need. So if someone said they never listen, you want to be heard. They will never understand me, so you want them to hear you. What's the point? They always ignore me. So you would like them to consider your point of view. So we're just moving it forward. There's also another way as well, because that can sometimes be hard. What is the positive opposite? But some of you have maybe come across something that we call BIN. And in all conflict resolution, what we're always dealing with is what is the behavior, what is the impact, and what is it you need? So even when we hear those labels and we want to separate the person from the label, if someone says they're a bully, well, what does bully mean? So I'm going to ask them, well, I'm going to try and reframe it, but I'm going to ask them, what is the behavior that makes you feel bullied? So I'm focusing on the behavior. Well, when they interrupted me in an open plan meeting and shouted at me, that's why I feel bullied. Okay, what was the impact of that interaction? Well, I felt humiliated. Okay, so when they interrupted you and raised their voice at you, you felt humiliated. So what do you need? Well, I need respect. So then by using behavior, impact, and needs bin, we can get to the same result. Because what is the positive opposite of bullying? We don't really know. What is the positive opposite of undermine? We don't know. So those more challenging phrases, we might use a slightly different approach to get to the same result, which is always going to be what do people need? And if someone says for them to stop bullying me, that's not a need, but what does that person need to do to engage with you in a different way? Well, they need to respect me, to listen to me, to not roll their eyes and so on. So we can use those two different ways. So Izzy, let's get people into a little bit of practice around that. So I've put some common phrases up there that I always hear when I'm doing my work. Just to give you an opportunity to either find the positive opposite of that statement. So what's the positive opposite, the need? Or you can use the bin as well. So Izzy, I think pairs will work best in this, but maybe a group of 3 just in case somebody drops out. Okay. And let's give people 10 minutes for this one.
No problem. I will sort that now. I am going to err on 3s. I think that's going to be better. Just give me 1 second. Right, fab. I will open. Perfect. They've just got 20 seconds left and then they'll be back with us. Perfect. That should be everybody back with us now.
Hey, welcome back. How do people get on with reframing? Anyone want to share which phrase they worked with and how that went? Madeline?
Yeah, so we worked with it's not fair. So it's unfair. Can you hear me right? Sorry, I'm going a bit slow on my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Connection's a little bit slow, but I can still hear you.
Yeah. So I said that it's just not fair, it's not working. And the people in my team, in the group, asked me, what do I think's not fair? And then they kind of positively span it around. I said that it's not fair that I always get dumped with the report and I always have to do the work. And they said, well, effectively, if you're being asked to do the report, it's because you're trusted and you have the skills and you have the knowledge. So, but you should, if you feel like it's overwhelming, you should ask for help. And I sort of said, well, it's not my responsibility to tell other people what to do. I'm not the manager. And then that person said, well, no, that's my role, but I will ask colleagues and say, can someone support Madeline on this aspect or on this part? And then that sort of was like, oh, okay, yeah, right.
Yeah, so really working with some of those blocks and being able to shift it. Yeah. Okay, that's great. And so yeah, having a conversation. Thanks, Madeline. Anyone else want to reflect back some of the phrases you worked with? Did anyone use the bin method to unpack any particular labels? Oh, Rosanna, you've come up on my screen. I don't know if that's because you want to.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. So, we'll carry on, and we'll go through some of the processes. Actually, before I do, I said I was going to give you another break, didn't I? I just noticed the time. It's 11:20. So should we just take another quick 5-minute, stretch our legs, grab some water? It's a bit warm. And then we'll carry on with, I want to go through, well, Okay, great. Fab. So we're going to move into, I guess, a bit of a frame for bringing teams together. And of course, there's going to be a bit of an awareness around how you do that and whether that's the right situation to do, because psychological safety will always be important. So here are a couple of things that are helpful, and it's, when you're bringing people into a mediation, if some of you are trained as a mediator or even as a team mediator, then there's quite a process around it in terms of preparation and bringing people together, even more so as a team. I've done team mediations with 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, 30 people, and it's quite an involved thing and lots of different personalities involved. But what we're thinking about is managers and leaders, how we can try and address some of that early conflict, whether it's two-party or teams, or whether it's somebody coming off a formal process back into a team. How can we just do a bit of a reset or address team conflict? And part of what we've already talked about, and particularly with the example that we all read around the doctor and the nurse, they both complained to the matron, and that's a real trigger to have had a conversation. But then also it went ongoing, and there was a patient complaint as well, and the team were camp A, camp B, so taking sides. So really a lot of what we want managers and leaders to do is be able to notice what's going on, those micro behaviors or those early level conflicts, and step in with an individual conversation first off. We wouldn't ever bring a whole team together or even two people together without doing that one-to-one. There's a couple of reasons for that. First, you want to know the story, the what happened. You want to give them an opportunity to diffuse some of that anger, that resentment, that tension. You have an opportunity for them to feel heard, to feel validated, understood. And we can't go from what happened to solution. What people will say is, I just want them to leave me alone. When actually we want people to get to a place where they can talk about what they're needing. So respect, understanding, support, rather than those positional outcomes. I want an apology in writing, or I want to take out a grievance. That is often about I'm responding to my threat rather than responding to my need. Okay. So having that one-to-one, and how do you approach it? It's much easier perhaps if somebody comes to you and says, look, this is happening, but where you might intervene and pick up something you're noticing, we want to use neutral language. So it might be, look, I just want to meet with you, have a little bit of time. Sometimes if we approach things, oh, how's everything going? We're going to get that fake harmony. Fine. Anything going on? No? How are you getting along with the team? So what people want is, why didn't you tell me? Why weren't you specific? So people want that, but we tend to be afraid of doing that sometimes. So I think it's as a manager and leader, it's reasonable to check in with our team and say, look, I've been noticing this. I could be wrong, but I wanted to check in with you. And when we're noticing or saying we're noticing something, we want to be very specific. So I'm noticing that you and Jane haven't been engaging over the last few team meetings we've had. I'm noticing a shift in how you are at work, and I just wanted to check in with you. So we want to make sure we're not approaching that in any kind of shameful way or judgmental way. We can all sort of be wondering, what's my manager want to talk to me about? So ease the anxiety as quickly as we can, and how you open that, but being very specific about what you're observing. Is this an individual thing or is this a team thing? So being clear about that. Is it conflict or what's going on? Is it maybe process? But yeah, having that one-to-one with individuals. Describing the impact as well, not in a blameful way. So as neutral as we can. So I'm noticing there's tension in the team. I'm noticing that it feels like, it could be wrong, it feels like that there's a divided team, and that I'm aware of some behaviors. And what we don't want to be doing is saying lots of people have come to me complaining. That will trigger a shame response, and you might then get defensiveness or shut down. So we want to own what we're observing as well. Having that conversation, so there are 3 different conversations. So what happened from your perspective? What are you experiencing? And it's that identity self piece. So whatever is coming through, we want to make sure we're listening for the onion and being able to reflect that back, or summarize, or name what we're hearing as well. So a big part of having that conversation, rather than just asking lots of questions, is important. And I like to describe it a bit like a figure 8. We ask what happened. We respond by acknowledging what they've said. Maybe we come in with another question. Then we maybe respond again. And so if we're just asking questions and not reflecting back, or not showing empathy or understanding, and or reframing and moving them forward, it can feel a bit rigid, and sometimes feels like a bit of an investigation. So we want to make sure we're doing all parts of the conversation. Where there's high emotion, we want to make sure, are we acknowledging that emotion, whether it's anger or whether it's tears? We want to avoid any assumptions. And so I like to use the 3 A's. So acknowledge the emotion. Ask if they would like to take a break. Would they like a glass of water? What do they need? And then asking, what's happened that is triggering that for them, or what's going on for them, or what are they needing to be able to take this forward. And then how do we think about resolving this? But I find that people need to be able to tell their story. And it's that, like someone said on the mediation course, we use a formula called SING: story, impact, needs, and goals. Because we know before anybody can even think about outcomes, they need to tell their story. They need to be able to have their say. They need that to feel heard and understood by the manager and leader, or by the mediator, but from a non-judgmental place and without agreeing, because mediators are impartial, and then focusing on needs and goals. And a goal is, think about the macro. We need to have professional team working. And a need is, well, what are the behaviors that make a professional team working? So could be respect, listening, asking questions, acknowledging. So what are the micro needs? Also, how are they individually? So do they need anything that may not be about resolving conflict or about the team? Maybe do they need any occupational support or any other support from the organization? So as your role as manager and leader, you're also about addressing that as well. Like in the case with the doctor and also with the nurse, there may be elements that they both need individually that aren't about bringing the team together. And I guess thinking about that scenario, if there is a Camp A versus Camp B, and 2 people's conflict is having an impact on the team, something we need to think about is, how do we design that process? Because having done lots of different team mediations, if there's 2 people that are in conflict, sometimes they can say, well, it's a team issue, but actually it's not a team issue. It's a 2-person issue, and it's impacted the team. And if you bring them into a team mediation, and we might say, well, if the team's there, I feel more supported and I've got my camp there and the other person's got their camp there. But actually what ends up happening is the team are observers on these two people resolving the conflict. So we're very clear about resolving that first, having a mediation first, or a facilitated conversation with the two people. Can they get into the right space before bringing the team together? So often it's a two-part process. If that's the dynamic, two people are in conflict and it's impacted the team. Because that will then dominate. And where there's conflict, like I said before, we're not doing team building. We're not doing evening at the pub. We're not going away and doing fun and games. It won't resolve the conflict. If you want to do that later, then that's absolutely fine. But if there's conflict, we need a conflict resolution approach. Otherwise, it won't resolve. But bringing the team together. They're going to look to the manager or whoever's facilitating that to really set the tone. And if the manager is involved in the conflict, then maybe they're not the right person to facilitate it. And you may want to access your resources internally if you have a mediation team or OD, or you've got people available to do a facilitated conversation, or you can ask for a mediator who's external to resolve the team conflict. But ideally, we want managers and leaders to be able to spot those early warning signs. Okay, let's come together. What's happened after you've had those individual sessions? And we want to start that process with having met everybody individually. Sometimes that's only a half an hour meeting or an hour, but that can happen over time. But for the actual team process, you want to make sure you're allowing time, because if you've got 6 people, 7 people, 10 people, that's a lot of airtime that you want to make sure that you're honoring, and giving time to be able to resolve it as well. But you want to be really clear about the purpose and the boundaries and the expectations. What hat are you wearing as the manager who's facilitating the conversation? As a mediator externally, I'm only wearing one hat as a mediator. So boundaries are really important. But even when I'm doing it, there's lots of planning, lots of thinking about different dynamics. Where are the different camps? Where are the conflicts across the team? What kind of conflict is it? Is it all against one? Is it a mix? Because if it's all against one, is that the right process? Is it mixed? Where are the different dynamics or personalities, or what might be the barriers? So really thinking about that from the outset. But based on the one-to-ones, we always ask people to have a mini summary to start the joint meeting, because we want everybody to have a voice. But we don't just say, okay, say whatever you want to say. We give people a frame. And it's similar: story, impact, needs and goals, or concerns, impact, needs and requests. But it's making sure that we're clear with them. It's about I statements, not we statements, because that will disrupt the team dynamic. So everybody owns their experience, okay? And that what is the impact, and yeah, what is it that people are needing? And particularly in a team, it's really good for people to make requests. What would make things better? What would make a good team? What would make this a psychologically safe team? But before people even get to that place, there's a lot of nervousness. Maybe they've been chatting about it. So clear expectations. And I remember working with a team of doctors once, and we spent most of the day just talking about trust, just talking about whether people felt they could be open and honest in their summary or not. And because if that isn't there around confidentiality, or can people really be open, then people won't be. And also setting those ground rules for how we're going to do the interaction. So no interrupting, or people can be open, respect, and that everybody's agreeing to those. So giving people that 5-minute summary with that structure. And then the facilitator summarizing those things, but not summarizing all the facts and events, but reflecting back what the impact was and what the needs are, because that sets us up for what we're going to be talking about. And the incidents and events are important, but what people want most is to feel understood and heard, and that how they've felt or the impact is recognized and understood, and how are people going to move forward. But how we manage that dynamic in a whole team, some of it is gut instinct, but a lot of it is observing where people are more quiet. Where are people more vocal? Are you giving equal airtime to people? Are you picking up on people's non-verbal communication? Are you addressing comments? Are you seeing where people have shut down? So we're managing that dynamic, but the key purpose is, how do we make the conversation easier so that everybody feels heard and that we can move forward? And so some of that is quite complex, and you want to have some confidence and training around that. But where managers and leaders can really get involved is in those early stages, where it's just happened, or it's only been brewing for a little while, because we want to nip those things in the bud, because it will escalate. And then we're managing that conversation. We want to bring them to a place of having a smart team agreement, and that's a working agreement that the whole team can review over time and tweak and reflect. How is it working? Is it not working? And most of us know SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So when I'm working with agreements, whether that's two-party or a team, we're using themes, not necessarily what has been discussed, but what do they want instead? So we want a team where we all feel trusted. We want better communication or better teamwork. And under each of those themes, what are we doing? So what are the behaviors? Well, we all agree to say good morning to each other, or we all agree to have verbal communication around these particular issues, or this is how we want to structure team meetings. Everybody attends. So the team are deciding how they want to do things as a team. But particularly also we want in there, well, what if they get into conflict again? How do we have difficult conversations? How would we approach that? And so then that's their team charter or team agreement. And there's ways that we can facilitate that with larger groups as well. But we want to make sure everybody's signing up to that. Everybody's agreeing on what that looks like. So including all the different voices. And I often say that mediation is the beginning. So lots of mediators will have different practices, but I know the sensitive time is the week after mediation or 2 weeks after mediation, when they've come out of that day of really intense talking, and now they've got this agreement, and it's like, okay, we have this in writing, and the mediation was last week. How do we start this? So I make sure all of my mediation agreements is, what does Monday morning look like? How do we start doing this? But also I do follow up and check-ins, and I would encourage managers and leaders to do that as well. A week or 2 weeks after the team session, how's everything going? How's the agreement working? And that's a regular check-in, because they've agreed how they're going to do things, and it's the psychological contract. Okay. So putting in those review dates and set those dates now. and particularly about how they're going to resolve conflict going forward. So I just wanted to okay, I've just seen you raise your hand. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to know what your experience is of working with neurodiverse individuals that may not necessarily see things the way that other people might see it. So yeah, I just wanted to get your experience of that, please.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience of working with individuals in neurodiversity, both on a coaching level and also in a mediation level. It's not always something that people are comfortable disclosing to the organization, but they disclose it in a mediation. And sometimes it is part of the conflict because there's a lack of understanding, or there's conflict that's come out because an individual who is neurodiverse, there's a lot of masking that goes on, understanding how that impacts people, I think, is really important. It can be challenging in a mediation from a perspective of intent versus impact. And there's a lot of sometimes, well, I'm neurodiverse and well, actually, and it still impacts me. And how do we remove blame and build understanding? And I approach it in similar ways, but something I do ask, I don't ever go to a mediation as an expert on neurodiversity because everybody's different. So I always ask the individual, how can I support them, and what do they want to share? What's important for them to bring into the mediation, if that's something that they want to bring in? And what often happens is people say, I feel so ashamed. I know that this is going on for me, and I know this has an impact, but I feel like I don't know how to work with it, or I just want them to be able to understand that I'm not a bad person. So shame is a really big part of that. And actually it was becoming such a problem, or it was not a problem, but it was coming through my mediation practice quite a lot, that one of the things that I started to offer the NHS, and I've done a couple of conferences on it, is conflict and neurodiversity, how we can support managers where there's staff who have either disclosed there's neurodiversity or perhaps haven't disclosed, and you've got all sorts of things around reasonable adjustments and fairness and the team's perception of what's going on in fairness, which can also cause conflict. And like I said, not everybody wants to disclose, but there's lots of strengths and there's lots of different elements there. But one of the things that I talked about around this is there's a lot of training where it just trains managers on what is neurodiversity, so definitions, and particularly focusing on autism and not always so much on ADHD or other areas of neurodiversity, and what are reasonable adjustments and how do we manage that. But actually, what isn't addressed is how do we manage the interpersonal elements? How do we manage the perceptions of unfairness around reasonable adjustments because we're keeping something confidential? How do we manage teams in that dynamic where there is no neurodiversity? So in terms of a mediation practice, I don't do anything specifically differently, but I'm working with inclusion and what does that person need from me? What does that person need from the other person? How do we manage that process? What adjustments do I need to make, if any at all, around the process, whether it's slowing things down, whether it's allowing somebody to work on an iPad, or whether it's bringing in support people. So it's really starting from a place of what is that person's experience? How does their experience show up in the workplace, and particularly in relation to conflict? Because there's been some research around that conflict or neurodiversity doesn't cause conflict, but there's a lot of conflict in teams, specifically where there's neurodiverse staff, and it has a massive negative impact. And so that's a particular interest that I have outside of the regular mediation the work that I do, and working with the NHS on filling the gap between current training that's being offered, which is a lot around definitions and reasonable adjustments, but managers need a little bit more nuance and understanding on how to support staff. So I don't know if that answers your question, Kay, but yeah, just a couple of thoughts there around neurodiversity.
Thank you, Nicole. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to go through some of the frames that I've just gone through that we use as mediators, and a version of that, because to be a qualified mediator at 6 days on an accredited course, or even I work with people a lot on training people on how to do team facilitation. And how do you manage those personalities? How do you manage those dynamics? But from a manager and leader, from an earlier stage, we can bring our teams together, and actually we can prevent conflict from escalating by having a team agreement, that psychological contract. So yeah, so I'll take some questions in a moment. But some of you I've worked with before, and I know your faces, but if you're interested in anything that I've talked about, or things that we've offered, I do mediation training for the NHS, as well as refreshing your mediation team if you've already done a big 6-day national process. I've just talked about the neurodiversity workshops that I do with managers, but thinking about mediation is still kind of offered a little bit too late in that conflict cycle. So we want managers and leaders to be able to notice those early warning signs and have those conversations. But also, can we bring mediation in much, much earlier, or other forms of informal resolution? Because the longer it goes on, the harder it is to resolve. And I, as an external mediator, get all the complex cases, which I love. But like I said, people feel a sense of relief, and then the sadness comes, and then the shame comes. And actually, sometimes post-mediation, we need to do some follow-up and conflict coaching or restorative sessions with teams and departments. So these are some of the things that I'm doing, particularly with the NHS, but other organisations as well. So do feel free to get in touch. But I want to stop the share just so if anyone has any questions about anything we've covered or anything else, I'm happy to